comp plan. And I just wanted to kind of take a quick look. This is, we did our community values and we did it for the entirety of Lake Chelan. So regardless of where you live in the city or the county, did anyone go to the State of the City earlier this year? Show of hands. Okay, so we've rolled out the core values and guiding principles and strategic initiatives, but I'll go over them really quickly. Coming out of that OVOF work was our 6 community values. Lake Chelan is the heart of our community. Small town, we appreciate a small town way of life. The natural beauty of North Central Washington. We take pride in our agricultural heritage. Locally owned businesses are the pride of our community, and we flourish with a sense of safety and security. So those 6 community values are really become the foundation of all the work that we do on top of that, down to the day-to-day strategic initiatives that we have outlined, and that drives the budget that we develop as a city. So just if we could go to the next slide here. I wanted to try and put into place so that you guys can understand from our community values to the comp plan, which is this process right now, to our guiding principles and our strategic initiatives. And each one of these have different timelines associated with them. Our comprehensive plan elements, these are really the long range plan that we have 20 years out. We're thinking about Lake Chelan and how those community values line up with each of the elements, which you guys will learn about tonight. Shoreline protection, land use, and climate change and resiliency really inform how we put into action protecting Lake Chelan. Housing, land use, rural development elements really feed into how we ensure that we keep a small town way of life. And I'm not going to go through every one of these points, but what you can do is if you type in City of Chelan strategic plan, that has a fleshed out version of our community values, our guiding principles, and our strategic initiatives. And this is just how we think about it in the city, of putting those core values into practice, into our comp plan for long range planning, and then how that drives our guiding principles, which is really our medium range set of priorities, 5 to 10 years, into the strategic initiatives, which is really a 1 to 2 year time frame and feeds our development of our budget. So we will have a quick overview of the elements tonight, but I just wanted to provide some perspective of how we take all the work that we all did as a community and put into establishing our core values. And then that's how that's translated into actionable plans where it actually impacts our day-to-day operation of both city and hopefully county throughout this process. So I'm going to hand this back over to Chad, and thanks again for attending tonight. I hope you guys learn a lot.
Thank you, Mayor. One of our strategic initiatives as a city is to manage growth. There's a lot that goes into that. I've been with the City of Chelan for a year now, and it has been an education to really look behind the scenes and to see how much work is done to thoughtfully and intentionally grow as a whole valley. And we have a fantastic community development department at the county and at the City of Chelan. And so I want to introduce John Ajax, who's our City of Chelan Community Development Director, and Susan Dredke, who's a Senior Planner with the county. And they're going to really walk us through the ins and outs of what we call comprehensive planning, of the Growth Management Act. And really tonight is meant to be a little bit of an education. So I want you to kind of put on your school hats. And know that as we move forward in this planning process, we're going to be asking for a lot of input from our community. But we want to make sure that you really understand and are educated on the nuts and bolts of what it takes and what it's going to require of us. And how we're all going to have to link arms together and work towards this end of really thoughtful, managed growth for our valley. And so the first thing that we're going to talk about is what guides growth. You know, what is it that really sets us up and helps us plan for the growth that we know is coming? And so I'm going to hand the microphone off to the experts. You guys are welcome to grab a seat, and we'll jump in.
Thank you. Okay, so just want to say one thing before we start. I am an ex-teacher, and so when you have your student hats on, just remember eye rolling can't be seen from up here. So feel free, but we won't see it. Thank you.
I'm not eye-rolling. Yeah, so up here we have our first slide of what guides growth. And so the city and county, we've been working together on comprehensive plans since the growth management became effective back in 1999. That was when we had our first comprehensive plan. And so basically what happens is we know that over the next 20 years, we're going to have growth. And so we can't control the speed of that because there is private property and we don't know how many people are moving here or how many births there are going to be and that sort of thing. And so what we do is we look at all of the different components that go into a comprehensive plan, and we want to make sure that those are all working cohesively within the city, but then all of the cities also within the county. So with that, I think really what's going on here is that the comp plan, as it's known, is made up of specific sections addressing different aspects of the community that must be considered as we grow, and we call these the different elements.
So back in my very young early planner days, which actually preceded the Growth Management Act, I know that's hard to believe because I look so young, but I worked for one of the counties at the time who actually sort of nudged the whole Growth Management Act effort along. And part of that was because 2/3 of the county was zoned what we call general use. And as you can imagine, general use really did mean general use. I mean, you could have a single family house next to a rendering plant, and other than a building permit, there was nothing else you needed to do for that. And probably no notice even went out. And so that obviously is not a sustainable method of looking at growth patterns in the county, in any county, in a city. And so one of the things that the state legislature did was decide that we needed to have, in this state, we needed to have some rules and regulations, if you will, of how the growth was going to be managed. We know it's going to happen. The Pacific Northwest has been one of the fastest growing areas in the country for quite some time now. And so in order to accommodate that growth, but try to maintain the quality and style of living to people who are already here, the comprehensive plan is the tool that we use to shape the development regulations that eventually are the rules that people need to build and develop by. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to John.
Yeah, and that's actually a really great point in part of the comprehensive plan. So I think where people really get involved in land use projects or when they see something happening in their general vicinity or neighborhood, that didn't just happen overnight. So that's when this process really starts. So the comprehensive plan, the last time we did this was in 2017, and that set the land use, which then ultimately becomes the zoning, which then allows for people to develop under those specific rules. So it's very easy for people to, that don't do this every day, to see a land use sign show up or get a notice in the mail that their neighbor might be subdividing their property or doing something that they typically, wouldn't think about. And really that process dates back years before that developer or individual is allowed to do what they're looking to do. So that's a really big consideration in this process, and it's great that everyone's here tonight because really this document, the comprehensive plan for both the city and the county, really shows what things are going to look like in the next 20 years. And so, so with that, there's things that we can't do. Yeah, and so these are pretty common sense, but I think a lot of people, will recognize that, we can't stop people from moving here. I think that's a big thing. We can't stop tourism from being here. We also can't stop or control how many First, or the household size of people who live here, we can't deny legal development, so that's what I was just talking about. So when we develop the rules and regulations through zoning, if an applicant goes through that process and meets all of the standards and provides the mitigation that's required for that development, it generally is allowed to be approved. And we can't control the economy, so that's a lot of the issues that involve affordable housing. There's things like labor and material costs and interest rates, and those are things that the city and county don't have control over generally. And we can't override state and federal laws, so there's a lot of top-down things coming out of the state now because we have such an affordable housing issue going on in the state where there are mandates that we have to allow for more dense development inside cities. And we can't force where people build or live, so there are different elements of zoning where we can't discriminate and say, hey, certain people have to live in this area and other people have to live in this area. That's just not allowed.
So the structure of a comprehensive plan includes what we call elements. And up there is a list of, there's 11 total, and we do have a board in the back, right, that shows what all of the 11 are. But we're focusing on certain ones in these update processes. Every comprehensive plan, when it's first developed for the first time, has to have all of these elements. As we update, we can, as a jurisdiction, pick the ones that are most in need of updating based on maybe population changes, economic changes, state laws that get passed, which does impact this round's update. So we look at land use. What's on the land? Where are the industrial uses located, or commercial uses located, high density residential, single family? Housing does that same, kind of a deeper dive into land, housing specific. Transportation, and transportation doesn't just mean the roads. Transportation means what type of roads, do they have sidewalks? Is there public transit available? Are there bike lanes? Is it safe for pedestrians? Where are the major intersections? Are those intersections controlled? So transportation covers a whole lot more than just the roads. Utilities, that's pretty self-explanatory. You've got electric, you've got sewer, you've got water. At capital facilities, those are the things like swimming pools, outdoor swimming pools that are owned by a public entity. Those are power plants, things like that. Number 6 up there, the climate resiliency effort element, that is new this year. So every comp plan update this year, or this round I should say, is going to have a climate resiliency element as part of the comprehensive plan update. Parks and recreation, city parks, county parks, anywhere there's a public recreation facility. And then rural really only applies to the county areas outside the urban growth areas. Because city is city jurisdiction, urban growth areas are where growth is supposed to occur, and then you have the rural areas outside of that.
Yeah, we're going to dive into each of these elements a little bit. So that was a great overview. So under the land use element, and maybe I should just back up a little bit, and this probably goes without saying, but there is a little bit of an overriding goal of the Growth Management Act and comprehensive plans, and that is that really growth should be concentrated where growth is most appropriate, and that is defined as being within urban growth areas and cities through the Growth Management Act. So by nature, cities are supposed to be more dense in order to protect rural and unincorporated portions of the county. And so how you do that is through your land use element. So this is where a comprehensive plan sets out the different spots where you'll have high density or low density residential, as well as things like commercial and industrial areas, and then also the rural elements where you have lower density rural minimum lot lot sizes, you know, going down to 2.5 acres all the way up to 20 acres, as well as commercial and resource land, so where agriculture is protected. And so what we've been talking about here, this is a graphical representation really that shows the urban growth areas in this part of the world. So you can see in the purple, that is the Chelan urban growth area. And cities can only be located within urban growth areas. So the city of Chelan is located inside of that purple area. And then Manson, although unincorporated, at some point in the future, in theory, could become its own city because it is an urban growth area. So everything outside of those two colored areas is the unincorporated Chelan County, as well as Douglas County on the other side of the river. One of the new components of the Growth Management Act for this year is the housing element. And so this is where we actually have to look at a land capacity where we get a population projection from the state that goes to the county. They distribute that amongst the cities as well as the county. And we have to be able to accommodate a specific individual population allocation for each city as well as the unincorporated Chelan County. In addition to that, there's a new law that went into effect where we have to accommodate individual segments of the population based on income and housing needs. So this is new this year. And so you look up here, this is for the Manson and Chelan UGAs. We have to support permanent supported housing and non-permanent support housing, and that's basically the way to define that is people that need round the clock care. So that can be assisted living facilities, it can be group homes for folks with special needs, that sort of thing, and then obviously the 0 to 30% area median income, all the way up to 120%. So we don't actually have to build each of these, and we don't have to necessarily make sure that, you know, these are happening, but we have to make sure that we don't have impediments to that becoming a reality for people. So we can't have areas where we're saying that you can only build market rate housing. So.
Okay, so I'm gonna jump in and ask some questions because we're talking about some big stuff.
Okay.
So why don't you take a couple minutes and explain what that area median income means and why those numbers are distributed across those percentages?
Yeah, so that's a great question, sorry. So area median income is generally derived by the federal level. It's the Housing and Urban Development section of the Fed. And they look at what's called the Chelan-Douglas Metropolitan Statistical Area. So it's based off of an average annual household income for a family of 4 in both counties. And I think currently that number was last updated a year ago, and I think for a family of 4, it's around $100,000 now. So when you look at the percentages here, 0 to 30%, that would mean obviously someone that's not making any income to 30% for a family of 4 of that $100,000, so $30,000. Does that sort of explain it?
Yeah, does that explain it? You guys tracking? Yeah, so that distribution basically guides our development and our growth across those areas. That growth needs to happen for people across all of these kind of economic bands.
Yeah, these are the permanent housing needs by each of those income levels. And these are based off of data that's a couple years old. So things that we know already, Chelan Valley Housing Trust has built some units that are between 80 and 110%. So those would be counted in these numbers already because those have currently been built.
And the other thing that you kind of just quickly mentioned was something called population allocation. So maybe explain how the state intends to manage the growth of people across Washington, across all these different jurisdictions.
Yeah, another great question. So I looked this up actually today. So between the last time we did this in 2017 and 2024, Washington State has added 1 million people inside the state. And so the Growth Management Act, by county level, they distribute that amount of people amongst the counties. So the county county gets a population allocation. There's actually a range, so it's a low, medium, or high growth projection for the county. And then the county works with each of the cities to determine where that population allocation, based on historical growth rates, is best allocated.
Got it, but the state can't tell people where to live. So how does that number guide us? How do we use that number?
So we, in this case, we know that Chelan is going to grow by 310 people, I think, over the next 20 years. So that was the portion that we were given out of the total that was given to the county, or 410, sorry.
Got it. So it kind of becomes a metric to use to plan for and to forecast.
Yep.
And sometimes it's accurate and sometimes it's not.
Yeah, really where the rubber hits the road on this one is if we were to estimate very, very high, obviously all of these numbers would have to go up as well. And that's probably not a reality for Chelan. We're gonna have a tough time meeting these already. We know that growth is gonna happen here, but going back to one of the previous slides, we can't control how fast that's happening. And if we grow faster than we should, the next go around, obviously these numbers would be, the growth rate would increase, so we would have a higher allocation for this part of the world.
I think every survey we do, every time there's feedback, one of the major concerns for our community is the affordability issue and affordable housing. So what are some things that we can do or that your department plans for to pave the way for that?
That's a loaded question. Yeah, so our urban growth area, obviously, if we didn't have enough land for people, we'd have to expand the urban growth area. If the state came back and said, Chelan County, you have to plan for 200,000 additional people over the next 20 years, and Chelan's gonna have to take 10,000 of those people, we know that our urban growth area right now couldn't accommodate that, so we would have to expand that urban growth area. And everything that comes along with that, so water, sewer, streets, everything that we have to plan for as a city would go along with that as well. Same with the county. I mean, obviously, the county has to deal with the road network, which is very vast. And so, yeah, we'd be in trouble in that regard, but getting to the affordable housing question, really what we need, we know we need more units. So we need people building housing here and not housing for short-term rentals and not second homes. We need permanent housing for people that work and want to raise families here. And there's a couple different ways that you can do that. There's no magic bullet. No city's figured this out, how to do this, because it really comes down to things like construction materials and labor costs and taxes and that sort of thing. But what the city can do on a minor scale is we can get out of the way a little bit as far as zoning and regulation goes. And then on the infrastructure side, we can work on utility connection fees, so that's water and sewer, especially when you have affordable housing. We can help reduce some of the burden with street improvements, such as curb gutter sidewalk developments when you're doing infill, that sort of thing. So
That's great. Thanks. One of the things people care about most, is housing and the affordability issue. I'd say the next thing that, they care a lot about is transportation. So tell us a little bit about what the transportation element covers, and then I'd love to invite our Public Works Director up to kind of tell us some of the specifics.
yeah, I think transportation is probably one of the more important discussions that happen in this part of the world. I think we hear about that a lot, both at city council meetings and planning commission. I'd say this is second probably to affordable housing. And so, our Public Works Director, Jake Younger, is
Come on
here.
up.
Yeah, so I can tell you, as part of one of the elements that you'll see in our comprehensive plan, which is transportation, we have to be able to show that we're able to accommodate traffic at some level of service, which I'll let Jake explain. But really what we have to do this year that's new is multimodal level of service, so. Yeah.
Thanks, John. My name's Jake. I think you're probably catching on by now. A lot of what we're required to do in this kind of effort is pretty well defined in state statutes, and so each element, and then kind of essentially what's included in each of those elements is well defined. So in transportation, I'm just going to go over a few of the items kind of on a high flyover of what this will look like when it's comes to fruition and is complete. So we'll need to be consistent with land use assumptions. So John started right off with, like, where are people going to live, where are they going to work, and what kind of ultimately impact on our transportation system will that create? So we'll have to evaluate that. Obviously, that's based off assumptions. It's imperfect, but we have a basis for generating those kind of numbers. Traffic impacts, so we'll look at development and what kind of impacts that will have on our existing road networks, mostly. Facility and service needs, so this is what we'll, it's kind of like take an inventory of your system, find deficiencies, and find fixes for those deficiencies. We measure that in an evaluation called level of service. It's essentially how is it performing, and there are different metrics for what that looks like. One kind of new thing is there's a term in our world we use called multimodal, and that mostly just addresses kind of like the wide range of modes of transportation, mostly motorized and non-motorized, so like bicycles, walking, those type of things, freight, public transportation. So we historically have been focused on evaluating level of service mostly in motorized scenarios. Coming up, we'll have to evaluate how to identify level of service in non-motorized. And so that's kind of a unique challenge. We're still trying to figure that out and working with neighboring agencies on what that looks like. We'll look at different potential funding mechanisms to address needed improvements. Intergovernmental coordination, so we'll need to take an effort to make sure our plans with our neighboring jurisdictions are hopefully consistent and aligned. I will mention, I think there's good momentum currently with leadership at county and city, with our mayor on getting different, and state even, getting our jurisdictions together and looking relatively holistically at transportation. You know, we all have our jurisdictional boundaries, like the city ends here, the county starts here. We have a unique situation in Chelan where our primary main modes of network are two state highways that bisect our community. And so the state has a stake in this as far as identifying how we can all work together and look at the valley as a whole. And so we're working on trying to address that in kind of a regional transportation planning effort that would go alongside of the comp plan effort. Let's see here. We're required to look at pedestrian and bicycle components as well. And so I guess really all I have to.
Yeah, and up here on the screen is just our priorities that we identified in the fall. Again, in preparation for our conversations around Transportation Benefit District, we got a lot of feedback from the community about what are the transportation issues that matter most. And this was a countywide, or a Lake Chelan Valley-wide effort. And you know, we were able to identify, okay, number one, easing traffic congestion, you know, improving or evaluating that level of service for those intersections and those roads. Second to that, emergency evacuation routes. That's something, you know, I live in Manson, and I have the thought sometimes of, yeah, how would we get out if the highway, you know, was closed around Rocky Point? What would happen? What would that look like? Enhancing pedestrian safety and walkability, safer access to schools, improving accessibility for an aging population, preservation of existing pavement surfaces, creating new walking and biking pathways, and beautifying the streets. And a lot of this are, you know, issues that we need to face in the short and the near term, but there's also a lot of long-range planning that will go into the comp plan to make sure that, you know, these don't become issues 20 years from now. The other thing that we hear a lot, and we get asked the question is, hey, can our utilities handle growth? Like, is our system maxed? Is it tapped? And so there's this whole utilities element of our comprehensive plan. And so Jake, do you want to just kind of talk about the state of our city utilities and kind of their capacity?
Sure, so this is just through the lens of Public Works, and our primary jurisdiction when it comes to utilities is we're the purveyor of a water system that touches most development in our city, as well as sewer system. That's a little bit more unique. We're more of a regional sewer system collection agency. We collect those within the city, but we also, the Lake Chelan Reclamation District has a service area in Manson, and their sewers pump to the city and ultimately through our treatment plant, as well as there's another sewer district on, we call it South Shore, that we also collect as well. So from an infrastructure, water sewer perspective, like we have our own independent long-range planning horizon documents. We look 20 years ahead, we look at capacity, we look at condition, we plan for improvements, and we plan for a way to fund them and execute them. For both water and sewer, we also evaluate that through the lens of being consistent with land use that John touched on earlier. These are just some kind of rough capacity numbers from, like, we certainly, like the city, these are treatment plant capacity kind of approximate numbers. Like we're currently about half capacity at water treatment plant and 37, maybe 38 now at our wastewater plant. So yeah, sure. Today we have capacity. As growth happens, that eats into capacity and ultimately leads to large construction projects to make improvements. But that's currently kind of where things stand in Florence.
That's great, thanks. The next thing we'll jump into is our capital facilities element. One of you wants to talk about that? And I'll just throw out there that this is Public Works Week, so if you see Jake, say thank you to him and his team for the great work they do.
Yeah, so Susan touched on this earlier, and this is actually a really important component of the comprehensive plan. It's one of the elements that probably gets overlooked, but I think if you were pretty savvy, you would look at this section and see how cities and counties are actually going to fund all their growth. So there has to be a game plan in there. And really what that means in the case of the city is our water and sewer comprehensive plans. We know how much we're going to grow. We know what the improvements are to accommodate that growth, as well as our roadway. And this is a big element for the county as well, because they provide a lot of lane miles that they have to maintain. So we also look at all of the other jurisdictions' capital facilities as well. So when you're growing, if you know that you're having a lot of families moving here, we need to be coordinating that with the school district to make sure that we have school capacity. We have to make sure that we have electrical capacity with the Chelan County PUD, as well as police and fire services. So all of these public agencies, they all have their own capital facilities plans, and really, in a perfect world, we would be coordinating all of this together and making sure that all of our goals are aligned. That's very hard to do because each agency has its own budget and different territorial boundaries. I mean, we're just a small component of Chelan County, as well as the school district and fire district. But we have to accommodate things. Also, like we have an airport here, which is it's just one of the things that we have they're expensive to maintain, and we have a partnership with the Chelan County Port, and right now we're in the middle of trying to figure out how we're getting water out there and how we're gonna get the runway expanded and the long-term maintenance of that facility.
Now, Susan mentioned something new for this year, which is climate resilience. Can you just define that term first and foremost? What does that mean?
Yeah, we need to be resilient in the face of sorry.
You can't use the word in the definition.
Oh, okay. That's true. We need to be able to mitigate the effects of climate change. So that
mitigates another big word.
Sorry. Yeah. And really, this is a new state mandated thing. I think when it comes down to common sense, people really understand what this means. We know in this part of the world that wildfire is something that is becoming a reality more and more each year. Wildfire smoke that comes along with that. Obviously, we have a lake that we want to make sure is pristine and healthy for generations to come, as well as the potential that we have more hot days, more cold days that can lead to drought, can have impacts on our agricultural sector, as well as just general household water usage. And yeah, we're really trying to do this. We're looking at how we can have real world mitigation, how we can make sure that we are addressing this in a common sense way. So that doesn't mean going out and chopping down every tree and that sort of thing. I mean, we're getting pretty strategic about this and trying to really partner up on different projects. So we know that we have a point of failure for our North Shore and our ability to fight fire right now. So there's a single point of failure potential. And we're trying to get another reservoir built that would provide redundancy to that. That's out at Apple Blossom Center. So that would provide mitigation in the event of a wildfire, that sort of thing. Then there's all sorts of land use things that go along with this. There's something called the wildland urban interface, and that has to do with basically providing protection zones around individual properties, as well as looking at specific areas on where we think that wildfire would most likely occur.
That's great. So it's not about, trying to prevent these things, because a lot of this is very much outside of our control, but how do we respond to it, and how do we be prepared for it and mitigate the effects of it in our daily lives? It was really interesting in the climate impact survey that we did. I think it was 70% of residents saying that these things have a regular impact on their quality of life throughout the year. And if our vision as a city is to provide an exceptional quality of life for our residents and for our guests, then we have a part to play in responding to and being prepared for these things. And, how does this actually practically play out in the comp plan? What does that look like? Will it have its own kind of chapter, or are there aspects of this kind of sprinkled throughout?
Yeah, there's different ways this could happen. We could have our own standalone chapter that would be climate resiliency. I think the most effective way to do this is to have relevant areas of climate resiliency in each of the other elements that are already defined. So, without getting into the weeds on how you do land use, there's things like critical areas that have to do with steep slopes, where there's potential for erosion and landslides, as well as habitat. That sort of stuff all gets taken into account when you're looking at your land capacity analysis. So things like the wildland urban interface that I was just talking about definitely gets roped into that. And then obviously when you get into the utilities elements, being able to have adequate fire flow and emergency access for transportation, all sorts of stuff. And when you get down to the building permit level, when someone's doing that, getting back to that wildland urban interface, that means having non-combustible siding, that sort of stuff. There's all sorts of standards that go into what housing materials you can use.
That's great. All right, we're rounding here towards the end. We've just got a couple more elements to cover. The Parks and Recreation element, what does that include?
Yeah, this is
The title's very,
it's just like the TV show. So in our Parks and Recreation element, we actually have what's called, it's Parks, Recreation, and Open Space. It's called a PROS plan. And we updated that recently through our Parks Department with Director Paul Horn. And it really looked at what our long-term needs are for parks in this part of the world. And I think this is something that a lot of people equate to public access for people being able to get into the lake and that sort of thing. And really what that comes down to, I'm going to use another weird term that people don't use a lot, is concurrency. And that basically means when growth occurs, that it has to pay or contribute its fair share to public services. So you define a level of service and you say we need to have X number or X acres of parks for X number of population. And so we've identified areas where we think street ends could be connections to the lake for little pocket parks and that sort of thing. And then just looking at some of the facilities here, we have a long-term plan for our RV park and golf course and that sort of thing to make sure that we're sustainable.
That's great. And then the last element is the rural element, and this is one that's particular to the county. Susan, is there anything that you want to add to this?
Well, like a lot of the other stuff, it's pretty self-explanatory. You'll notice if you look at a zoning map in the county that you have zones RR 2.5, RR 5, RR 10, RR 20, and you'll notice that the closer to the urban growth area boundary, the higher the density. So the pattern is you want your high density development within the city, but as you move out into the more rural area, the closer properties tend to be zoned the higher density versus out in the farther away where you've got rural residential 20, which means you basically have to have a 20-acre lot if you're creating new lots. So 1 20-acre per single family house. The other really strong, important element that you find in the rural element is what we call the resource lands. And they have a separate category, but that's your mineral conservation, your forest, commercial forest, and your commercial agriculture, which is obviously a very important designation in this county.
You've got a map out there, right, that shows
We
some of this?
do have a map that is fairly limited, but it does show the Chelan, the Chelan Valley area with the urban growth areas of both Manson and Chelan, and then you'll notice the pattern of the rural 2.5, 5-acre, 10-acre, 20-acre, and then where the commercial agriculture is involved. Not a whole lot of commercial mineral resource lands in the county, mostly commercial agriculture and commercial timber, commercial forestry.
So as we close up our night tonight, this is just the beginning. Both the county and the city, as we step into this process, are really looking forward to hearing more from our residents, from giving opportunities to weigh in through surveys and forums and open houses like this one. So we certainly want to keep you in the loop and check the things or the places that you find your news source from maybe the county or the city, whether that's online or on websites or social media or on the radio. But as we leave today, we want to do a couple things. One is there's a chart in the back. Brad is going to point to it. Well done. And there's the opportunity for you to say, hey, this is an issue that I care a lot about. And that help guides us and where we can put some efforts over the course of the next year in terms of finding opportunities for you to weigh into those things. There's also a place for you to say, hey, I've got big questions about this, or I have concerns. And so make sure on your way to this next that you take a second to do that. We also have a city council election coming up here this year in the city of Chelan, and I know a number of our